Alright, so I'm going to teach you guys today how to add a component into the game. So first of all, we're going to go make a new class. Let's call this GUI component. Alright, so once we get this thrown in, we want it to have inheritance from component. Alright. So once it's got inheritance from component, we can actually go in and look at one of our simplest component, which is the health component. See basically the functions that it needs, which are these. So we can get rid of these two functions because, as you can see in here, they're not used. Then we go into the CPP file, collapse everything, copy over these, and just change all of these into GUI components. Right. So now we want to add a new component ID for the GUI. So that's inside the miscellaneous files. Our helper miss. Here's your component ID. So we're going to add GUI to the list. So we put 128 here, and we put 256. Alright, so once we got that in, our GUI is ready to go. Okay, so this is a basic structure. Now we're going to add the element to be parsed. Let's go into XML folder. Go to XML parser right here. Right, and inside the parse game object, we want to add a new attribute basically. So we're going to do else if lm name equals GUI, then go ahead and parse GUI component. There we go. So then we're simply gonna copy one of these over, change this to parse GUI component. Alright, and then once we're in here, we want to include the GUI component. Right, so it can be created. We're going to change this to GUI component. Call this guy GC. Alright, so now it's being instantiated right here. We're setting the owner. Alright, we're initializing it, and now we got to add the component to the game object. The important part here is actually making sure the component ID is correct. And you can change this right here. So now that's all the basic setup. So now if we go in here and so this ally component, right, and we add GUI right here as such, and when we actually run the game, hopefully it'll run correctly. Didn't miss anything important. Let's see. You guys can skip ahead of this in the video once it gets up. Alright, come on. Alright, so there we go. As you can see, GUI component is added, and it's working fine. It got loaded incorrectly. Alright, now the next thing to do is to actually call the update function on that GUI component, right? So the way that we're going to do that, in the case of simplicity right now, we're going to go into our system. Generally, a GUI gets called inside the render function, right? So we're going to go inside our render system right here. And inside our update function, alright, you see how it gets called. We can close this. This is where it gets called, basically, all the rendering. So right here we see game objects, kept entity component. Then you have this very important piece right here, checks for all the game objects. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to copy this, right, and then we're going to set it up right here. Game objects, get game objects, and then instead of doing the render, we're going to do GUI. And then from here, we're going to do get the GUI component. The reason that you got that, then we're going to get GUI. We call the update function. And then we're going to get this off. So now, if we actually go into the GUI component right here, and I'll set a breakpoint right here, you can see how the GUI function gets called, the update function gets called. Alright. We can just do this. No. Alright, that's weird. So what do you give us in there? So apparently it doesn't have the component, and it's still passing through it. Health components. Health. Apparently has two health components for some reason. I know why this just happened. So if we go in here, see how the ID is set up as ID. So now if we actually run it, it'll actually tell the compiler that everything is working fine. And boom. So this is a very important part. Make sure that you don't forget this. So that's how we add a new component and then add its update method. In this case, it can be any system that pertains to this particular object. In this case, the rendering system works fine because a GUI is something we want to render. And that is all as for adding a new component into the system.